Final Fantasy 16 is one of those games where if you look online, you either see people who absolutely love it and praise it and it's their game of the year, or you see salty Final Fantasy fans who feel absolutely betrayed and are ready to end their career of living. And I'm neither of those, but I also don't like it either.
Surprise!
Now normally I would just talk about the gameplay, but it's hard to talk about this game without talking about the story, so let's just get into it. Now I know I said I don't like this game, but one thing I gotta give them credit on is the world building, and you can tell they put a lot of thought into it, from the magic system, dominance, politics, and even slavery. So a brief rundown on all this is that dominance, they're broken as hell. They have the ability to summon monsters with just a thought, without the use of crystals, but they slowly start to die the more they use them. What are the crystals, you ask? Well, most people can't use magic in this world, so they need these shiny little gems to do it. But it's a limited resource, which is why certain countries are willing to wage wars for them, since their societies depend on them for various reasons. And finally, we have the bearers. Bearers are a lot like dominants, where they can just use magic anytime they want. They're not as powerful, but they still have a lot in common though, because they also die from it too.
You've slept long enough. It's time to go home.
Since they're weak as hell but still valuable, most of them are enslaved and forced to use their magic until they turn to stone. Remember when everyone complained about no people of color being in this game? Sure dodged a bullet with that one, huh? Now all this stuff is pretty well thought out, since on the surface, they seem like separate issues but are all connected in some sort of way. And I love that stuff, just not the story.
Damn!
Yeah, the way everything works is interesting, but the characters aren't. Most of them don't have any sort of personality, and their interactions with you just kind of boil down to the same thing, which is usually explaining the plot to you, asking you to do something, or trauma dumping all over you.
They invaded not long after because once they learned that the lash would not move me, the man who made me do all those unspeakable, I saw the patriarch do things no one should have to see.
Tragic!
And say what you will about Final Fantasy 15, but at least the Backstreet Boys were super charismatic and they had a really enjoyable dynamic between them. There's nothing like that in 16. And yeah, there's a few characters I like, but that's just because most of them were pretty funny. Especially Sid. I love this dude and he completely steals the show, and he's easily the best character.
Find out if this man's responsible and kill yourself if he's not.
Not only that, but there's also the plot itself, which really boils down to Clive's revenge arc, destroy the crystals, kill God. Pretty standard JRPG stuff, but there's just so much stuff in the story that could easily be taken out. Like for example, Ultima's arc, where he says he needs to make Clive so he can take his body, and then all he does is turn into a child, makes Dion kill his dad, and has his boy toy kidnap Jill, and then he just leaves. Like maybe it's just me, but I'm not really seeing the big plan here.
You look confused, boy!
There are other arcs and elements to the story just like this too, but the main ones I want to focus on are the arcs for Clive, Dion, and Titan. Now the main arcs for Dion and Titan really boils down to, I got huge pee-pee boner for somebody in my life, and now somebody's taking him away from me. And yeah, that's cool and all, but does it really add anything?
I think not!
In fact, it'd actually benefit the game if they did take it out, but leave Titan screaming in though, because that's pretty funny.
I'll kill you! I'll kill you!
The same thing can be said for Clive's whole situation too. There's no real payoff to it narratively, even with his whole Persona 4 moment. This is even more so true once you realize that Joshua is alive. Which was obvious. And like an asshole is hiding himself from Clive, even though it's messed up that not only is he letting his brother believe he killed him, he didn't even tell him about Ultima, even though he knew this dude was coming after Clive.
After going through the clips for this video, I got hit with flashbacks and realized that things are even worse than I remembered. None of the characters outside of Sid have any real motivation. For Clive's mom, she was set up to be an antagonist who manipulates any royal she can find to achieve her goals, but there's no real reason for it, so they just have her be a bitch the entire story for no reason, until she commits slip and slide. Coupe Cop is shown to be a brilliant and respected leader, but ends up simping the whole story, and has no goals or motivations outside of revenge, which is a complete waste. Benedicta was a character who was ruthless and still had people following her for some dumb reason. It seemed like she had plans to play both Coupe Cop and Barnabas, but ended up dying after her Naruto flashback about Sid that nobody cares about. As cool as Barnabas is, he's the equivalent of a Mormon coming to your doorstep, but with powers. We don't really know his motivations, and we just see him simp Ultima, while he cosplays his dead, naked mom.
Instead of the pointless arc at the beginning, I would have much preferred it if Clive knew that he killed those people at the castle, and makes himself a slave to atone for it. This would not only fit his character, but it would also make his goals more understandable, and it would give us more time to feel for him and the characters around us. But you know what the funny thing about all this is? Even though I said all that, I actually wouldn't care about any of this stuff, or the issues with the story. The only reason I do care is because the game's more interested in it than the game itself.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Want to do a main quest? Cutscene. Doing a boss battle? QTE and cutscene. Want to progress in any way, shape, or form? Nah. Let's have you walk back and forth between people and places that all have cutscenes.
But BeeG, it's an RPG, and not just any RPG, but a JRPG from Nippon, which means it'll have a lot of cutscene. You probably just came into it with the wrong expectation.
Yeah, no. And I say this for a few reasons. For one, this game plays more like an MMO, where they have you walk back and forth doing filler side quests under the guise of exposition and world building, when for the most part, the conversations are a bunch of nothing. You'll be drained from it always being nothing, or from the walk back and forth between places. The second reason is that Yoshi P,
the producer of
Final Fantasy XVI, stated in some interviews that he felt the game would be best with non-stop action.
I wanted to let everyone know we're really not against turn-based games. We're fans of them too. But for the story we wanted to tell, the look of the game, and a feeling of dynamic, non-stop action felt best suited to the story and what we wanted players to feel.
Lastly, the biggest reason I disagree with the RPG argument is because in a lot of ways, it isn't. Because Final Fantasy XVI never actually commits to anything it wants to be. It wants to be an RPG, but the only RPG elements in the game are leveling up and talking to people. It wants to be a grounded Game of Thrones-like story, but also a Studio Trigger anime. It wants to be an action game, even though the story is the majority of it and the combat is neutered for newcomers. And me saying all this might come as a surprise to some people, since I've done nothing but defend this game's combat since the demo released. And while I still stand by what I said, and I think it's decent in a lot of areas like the icon customization, the stagger system, which is pretty okay, and the boss fights, which are easily the best thing in this game, it still suffers in a lot of ways. The frame rate constantly dips to about 40 to 50 frames per second, which hurts combos and the timing of moves. The particle effects make it hard to see anything on the screen, so you'll always be seeing Christmas in July. There's almost no point to the party system since they just do a little extra damage and heal you sometimes. And the biggest issue of them all is that Clive's basic moveset is really small. This guy only has 5 or 6 melee attacks he can do throughout the entire game, and it never opens up beyond that. And sure, you have your icon abilities and Torgal, but it's more of a band-aid for the combat than an extension of it. And not only that, icons take forever to get in this game. During my first playthrough, it took 4 to 6 hours sometimes for Clive to get a new icon. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a bit too long to me.
But BeeG, you just want every game to be like Devil May Cry, which is why you're saying all this about 16's combat.
So?
Nah, I'm just kidding. When it comes to this issue, I'd honestly rather it be like the Kingdom Hearts series. At least in those games, as you level up, you unlock new melee attacks, you buy them, and it opens up the combat a lot more and keeps things fresh and interesting. And this is also why you're waiting for other cool stuff too, like the summons, forms, and spells. Thank you, 20-year-old game. Now, the last thing I want to touch upon is a bit more positive. One thing I admire in action games is replayability. Even though most people don't play a game the second time, let alone finish them, it's still an important part of them. Now, most devs will just crank up the health and armor and call it a day, but the people working on 16 didn't do that. On the higher difficulties, you'll be met with remixed enemies. They're also tougher, and some of them even have different moves. I gotta give them a round of applause for this one. It's really rare to see stuff like this, especially in a AAA game, which is sad, really. But now it's back to being Mr. Negative again, because even though they designed higher difficulties to have replayability, the rest of the game stops it from being just that. So you'll still have to deal with filler side quests, the combat never opening up, and the cutscenes, which a lot of them you can skip, but there's a lot you can't, mainly at the bosses. I hope they patch it out so you can just hit the guy and it transitions to the next phase, because it really kills the pacing of the fight, or at least put Subway Surfers and Family Guy on the side of the screen. The kids love that stuff. Now, I just said all this negative stuff about this game, so that must mean I hate it. Nah, not really. I still think the combat, while not deep, is fun. The bosses are fantastic, except the spectacle ones. The music sounds like it was composed by God. Some of the environments look amazing, and icon customization is still really fun. I just think 16 never focuses on what it's trying to be, or its best aspects, while also trying to accommodate the new players of the series and the action game genre, while it's also trying to please longtime fans. Is it a game I like? No. Is it my game of the year? Hell no. But in many ways, it's a game I'm a little let down by, but still respect.